The dragons had ruled the world for longer than anyone could remember. Their shadows darkened the skies above every kingdom, every village, every lonely farm at the edge of civilization. They were living gods of fire and terror, and they knew it. Every creature that walked or crawled or swam lived only because the dragons allowed it. For 10,000 years. This was simply the way of things. The great worm Carvathax descended from his mountain lair once, every season, to collect tribute from the human settlements in his territory. The villages would gather their gold, their finest cattle, and sometimes their daughters, and lay them before the dragon like offerings to a god. Carvathax would take what he wanted and leave the rest in ashes if the tribute displeased him. It usually displeased him. The humans had learned to accept this. They built their homes knowing they might burn. They raised their children knowing they might be taken. They prayed to gods who never answered and accepted that prayer was all they had. The dragons were too fast, too strong, too armored in scales that laughed at bronze and iron. Fighting back was not courage. It was suicide. In the village of Millbrook, a blacksmith named Aldrich worked his forge like his father before him and his father before that. He made horseshoes and plowshares, cooking pots and door hinges. Simple things for simple people living simple lives under the shadow of wings. He was 17 years old and had never known a day without fear of the sky. The tribute day came in autumn that year. The village had gathered everything they could spare and laid it in the clearing beyond the western fields. The gold was less than last season because the mines had flooded. The cattle were thin because the summer had been dry. The village elder, a woman named Marta, who had survived 3 generations of tribute, stood before the offering and prayed it would be enough. It was not enough. Carvathax came down from the mountain like a falling star, made of darkness and rage. He was ancient beyond measure, his scales black as coal and hard as diamond. His eyes burned with a fire that had consumed 10,000 souls. He looked at the offering laid before him and he laughed, a sound like thunder cracking stone. "Is this what Millbrook thinks I am worth?" the dragon asked. His voice was deep and terrible, a sound that shook the earth beneath their feet. "Is this the respect you show to your master?" Marta fell to her knees. "Great One, we have given all we have. The floods took our gold. The drought took our cattle. We are poor this year, but next season, there will be no next season for Millbrook." Carvathax said. The fire came without warning. One moment the village stood as it had for 200 years. The next moment it was an inferno. The dragon swept over the buildings with his wings spread wide, pouring flame from his throat like water from a broken dam. Thatch roofs exploded. Stone walls cracked from the heat. People ran screaming in every direction, but there was nowhere to run. Aldrich had been at his forge when the attack began. The building collapsed around him, timbers falling in sheets of flame. He should have died there with the others. But the forge had a back door that led to a drainage ditch, and the ditch led to the forest. And Aldrich ran with fire licking at his heels, until the trees swallowed him whole. He stopped at the top of a ridge a mile from the village. He could still see Millbrook burning, still hear the distant screams of the dying. Carvathax circled above the destruction, like a vulture admiring its meal. The dragon was in no hurry. He had all the time in the world. Aldrich watched for 3 days. He did not watch out of grief, though grief was there. He did not watch out of hatred, though hatred burned hotter than any forge. He watched because something inside him, some part of his mind that was uniquely human, had started working on a problem. He noticed that Carvathax favored his left wing when he banked in flight. An old injury, perhaps from some ancient battle with another dragon. He noticed that the dragon slept in the hours after feeding, his body still and vulnerable while it digested. He noticed that a faint orange glow appeared in the dragon's throat before every burst of flame, a warning that came exactly 4 seconds before the fire. 4 seconds. That was time. That was opportunity. That was something to work with. When Aldrich finally left that ridge, he was no longer a blacksmith. He was something new, something the dragons had never encountered in their 10,000 years of rule. He was a scientist, though the word did not yet exist. He was a man who had looked at a god and seen an animal that could be studied, an animal that could be understood, not an animal that could be killed. He found other survivors in the forests and fields, refugees from a dozen villages that had suffered similar fates. They were broken and afraid, convinced that resistance was impossible. Aldrich did not try to give them hope. Hope was cheap and easily shattered. Instead, he gave them something far more valuable. He gave them information. The dragon has a bad wing, he told them. The dragon sleeps after eating. The dragon gives a warning before its fire. The survivors looked at him like he was mad. Perhaps he was. But madness and genius often wear the same face. And in that moment, in that forest, the first seeds of humanity's rebellion were planted. The dragons did not notice. They never noticed the humans. That was their first mistake. It would not be their last. 50 years passed like water flowing downhill, slow and steady and impossible to stop. The dragons continued their rule, burning and killing and taking tribute as they always had. They saw no reason to change. Why would gods change? They were eternal. They were perfect. They were everything they had always been. The humans, meanwhile, were becoming something new. Aldrich was an old man now, his hair white and his hands trembling from decades at the forge. But his mind remained sharp as the blades he had once crafted. He had spent half a century building something that had never existed before, a network of scholars and observers spread across 100 villages in a dozen kingdoms. He called them the Chroniclers, and their purpose was simple. They watched the dragons. They wrote down everything they saw in hidden rooms and secret cellars. The chroniclers compiled their observations into books that grew thicker with each passing year. They recorded flight patterns and territorial boundaries. They noted which dragons were rivals and which were allies. They cataloged mating seasons and migration routes, feeding habits, and sleeping cycles. Every scrap of knowledge about dragonkind was collected, copied, and shared through a network of messengers who risked their lives to carry information from one safe house to another. The dragons never noticed. To them, humans were like ants, too small and insignificant to warrant attention. This blindness was exactly what Aldrich had counted on. The breakthrough came from a young woman named Sira, who had never seen a dragon up close and hoped she never would. She was a mathematician, a profession that most people considered useless at best and witchcraft at worst. She spent her days studying the paths of thrown stones and falling objects, trying to understand the hidden rules that governed their movement. One day, Sira was reading a chronicler's report about a dragon attack on a fishing village. The report included detailed measurements of the fire's reach, observations about wind conditions, and estimates of the dragon's altitude during the assault. Most readers would have found this information horrifying. Sira found it fascinating. "The fire doesn't go forever," she said to herself. "It has a range. It follows rules." She spent 3 months working on the problem, filling page after page with calculations and diagrams. She studied reports from dozens of dragon attacks, looking for patterns that others had missed. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand. Dragon fire was not magic. It was chemistry and physics, heat and fuel and air. It could be measured. It could be predicted. It could be avoided. Sira presented her findings to the secret council of chroniclers on a winter night, when snow fell thick outside the hidden meeting hall. The old scholars listened in silence as this young woman explained things that contradicted everything they thought they knew about their oppressors. "They're not gods," Sira said. her voice steady despite the importance of her words. They're animals. Large and dangerous and ancient, but animals nonetheless. They follow rules just like everything else in the world. And anything that follows rules can be understood. Anything that can be understood can be defeated. The council members exchanged glances. Some thought she was brilliant. Others thought she was insane. Aldrich, oldest of them all, simply smiled. "Show us," he said. "That it took 2 years to plan the first dragon kill." The chroniclers identified a young dragon named Thesserax who had recently claimed territory in a mountain pass used by merchant caravans. Thesserax was aggressive, but inexperienced, prone to predictable attack patterns that Sira could model with her mathematics. They calculated the precise angle of approach that would bring the dragon diving into the pass at maximum speed. They measured the wind conditions needed to make the trap invisible from above. They designed hidden spikes of hardened steel coated in a poison derived from studying dragon digestive systems. Information gathered from the corpse of a dragon that had died of natural causes a century ago. The trap was built in secret over 6 months. 50 volunteers positioned themselves along the pass, ready to act as bait. They knew most of them would die. They volunteered anyway. On the day of the ambush, everything went exactly as Sira had calculated. The volunteers revealed themselves and began a fighting retreat through the pass. Thesserax, young and arrogant, dove after them with his wings folded for speed. He never saw the spikes hidden beneath the camouflage covering. He never understood what killed him. The dragon crashed into the mountainside with enough force to trigger a small avalanche. 23 volunteers died in the attack and its aftermath. But when the dust settled, Thesserax lay dead among the rocks, his body pierced by a dozen steel spikes driven deep by his own momentum. The older dragons called it a fluke, a lucky accident that meant nothing. One dead dragon in 10,000 years of absolute dominion was not a defeat. It was a statistical anomaly. The humans knew better. They gathered around the corpse and began taking notes. They measured the penetration depth of each spike. They studied the poison's effect on dragon flesh. They calculated exactly how much force had been needed to pierce scales that had laughed at every weapon humans had ever made. Aldrich died peacefully in his sleep that winter, 82 years old and content. He had lived to see proof that the dragons could be killed. He had planted seeds that would grow into forests. On his deathbed, he gave his final instruction to the next generation of chroniclers. "Keep watching," he said. "Keep learning. Keep teaching your children what you learn. The dragons have forgotten how to change. We have not. That is how we will win." 3 generations had passed since the first dragon fell in that mountain pass. The humans had not wasted a single day of those long years. While the dragons slept in their golden hordes and fought their petty territorial wars, humanity had been changing in ways that the ancient beings could not understand. The great worm, Malatrax, was the oldest dragon still living. He had seen empires rise and crumble to dust. He had watched mountains wear away to hills. He had lived so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be surprised by anything until now. Malatrax had called this council because something strange was happening in the human kingdoms. Dragons were dying. Not many, not often, but far more than should be possible. In the past century, 17 dragons had been killed by human hands. 17. In all the millennia before. The number had been 0. The council gathered at the Obsidian Summit, a volcanic peak that served as neutral ground for dragon assemblies. A dozen of the mightiest wyerms in the world landed on the black stone, their scales gleaming in colors of fire and shadow. They had come expecting to discuss punitive measures. Perhaps the destruction of a few human cities to remind the lesser creatures of their proper place. Malatrax had other concerns. "They are learning," he said. his voice rumbling through the volcanic chamber. Every attack we make, they study. Every dragon we lose, they examine. They are building something we have never seen before. The other dragons shifted uncomfortably. Krivax the Red snorted plumes of smoke from his nostrils. They are insects, he said. They always have been. A few lucky kills mean nothing, do they? Malatrax gestured with one massive wing toward the horizon. Look at their cities. Really look. They build towers taller than trees now. They forge metal stronger than our ancestors ever knew. They have weapons that can pierce our scales, armor that can resist our fire. And worst of all, they share everything they learn with each other. So we burn their cities, Krivax said. We destroy their towers and their forges. We remind them what we are. We tried that 3 years ago, Malatrax replied. We burned the city of Valorheim to ash. Do you know what happened next? The other dragons waited. Within 6 months, every human kingdom had detailed plans of how we attacked. They knew our flight patterns, our fire ranges, our preferred assault formations. They had built new weapons specifically designed to counter our tactics. The humans who survived Valorheim taught everyone else what they had learned. Silence fell over the council. Dragons were not used to thinking about such things. They were individuals, each one supreme in their own territory. They cooperated rarely and shared knowledge never. The idea that humans might be stronger together than apart was alien to their understanding. Thessera the Silver spoke for the first time. She was young for this council, barely 1,000 years old, but she had been paying attention to the human threat more closely than her elders. I have been watching them, she said. They have created something called universities, where they teach their young everything their ancestors learned. A human born today knows more than a human who died a century ago. They build on each other's knowledge like stones building a wall. We do not need walls, Krivax sneered. We have fire. Fire that they can now predict, Thessera replied. Fire that they can dodge if they know it's coming. Fire that they have learned to resist with new materials and techniques. Our fire has not changed in 100,000 years. Their defenses change every decade. Malatrax nodded slowly. That is the true danger. We are what we have always been. They are becoming something new with every generation. We have been fighting individuals. They have been building a collective mind that grows stronger every year. The dragons argued for 7 days and 7 nights. Some wanted immediate war, a devastating strike that would reduce humanity to scattered tribes. Others counseled patience, convinced that the human threat would fade like all the others before it. A few suggested retreat to remote regions where humans could not follow. None of them truly understood what they were facing. While the dragons debated, human messengers were carrying reports across the continent. The council at the Obsidian Summit had been observed from hidden positions miles away. The dragons' arguments had been noted by lip readers using telescopes. Their concerns had been recorded, analyzed, and shared with military commanders in every kingdom. Humanity knew they had been noticed. They knew the dragons were afraid. And they knew that afraid enemies were the most dangerous kind. General Mira Chun read the intelligence reports in her command tent and allowed herself a small smile. She was the leader of what humans called the Alliance, a coalition of kingdoms that has set aside centuries of rivalry to face the dragon threat together. She was also the great-great-granddaughter of a blacksmith's apprentice who had escaped a burning village long ago. They're scared, she said to her advisors. They finally realized that we're not just insects anymore. But they still don't understand the real problem. What is the real problem, General? Her aide asked. Myra Chun looked at the map spread across her table, covered in markers showing dragon territories, human fortifications, and the supply lines that connected 100 cities into a single war machine. The real problem is that they think they can win by being the same thing they've always been. Stronger, fiercer, more ruthless. But strength isn't evolution. Ferocity isn't adaptation. They've been standing still for 100,000 years, and we've been running. She moved a piece on the map, beginning a strategy that would take years to complete. They can't catch up. Not anymore. They lost the race the moment we started running. The last Dragon War, as human historians would name it, lasted 17 years. It was not a war of great battles and glorious charges. It was a war of patience and precision, of small victories that built upon each other like bricks in an endless wall. The dragons had numbers and power on their side. They could fly faster than any horse could run, burn hotter than any forge could melt, and shatter stone walls with the sweep of a tail. In a fair fight, any dragon could kill 1,000 humans before falling, but humans never gave them a fair fight. Every dragon that died was studied. Teams of scholars would descend on the corpse within hours, measuring and sampling and recording. They learned which scales were weakest and which angles of attack were most effective. They discovered that dragon blood could be refined into explosives, and dragon bone could be carved into weapons that pierced. Dragon scale. They turned their enemies' bodies into tools for killing more enemies. Every failed attack was analyzed. Commanders would gather after each defeat to discuss what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. Reports were written, copied, and distributed to every army in the alliance. A mistake made in the Eastern kingdoms was never repeated in the Western ones. Every successful technique was refined and shared. When a young soldier in the southern deserts discovered that dragons could be blinded by a particular combination of chemicals, that knowledge reached the northern mountains within weeks. When an engineer in the coastal cities designed a new type of crossbow that could penetrate dragon scales at 200 meters, the plans were sent to every forge in the known world. The dragons could not match this. They did not know how each dragon fought alone, relying on instincts that had served their kind for 100 millennia. They did not share information with rivals. They did not learn from each other's deaths. They did not change their tactics when old methods failed. They were perfect apex predators frozen in amber while the world evolved around them. One by one, they fell. Kravax the Red died in a valley that had been turned into a killing ground. The humans had spent 2 years preparing that valley, filling it with hidden weapons and escape tunnels and carefully calculated fields of fire. They lured Kravax there with a fake caravan and closed the trap behind him. He killed 200 soldiers before he died. The humans considered it a good trade. Thessera the Silver was captured alive after a battle that left half of her scales shattered and her wings too damaged to fly. The humans did not kill her immediately. They questioned her, learning more about dragon society and biology in a month than they had gathered in decades of observation. When she finally died of her wounds, they dissected her body with the precision of surgeons. Malacharax, wisest of the ancient Wyrms, fled to a remote island where no human had ever set foot. He thought he would be safe there, alone at the edge of the world. He was wrong. Human ships found him within 3 years. They had built vessels specifically designed for crossing deep water and carrying weapons capable of killing dragons. The great worm died on a beach of black sand. Watching the next generation of humanity march ashore with weapons that would have seemed like magic to their great-grandparents died by the 17th year of the war. Only one dragon remained. Her name was Isolderix, and she was old beyond measure. She claimed to remember the world before the first human had stood upright on 2 legs. She had watched the little creatures multiply across the continents like insects spreading through a garden. She had never feared them. She had never imagined she would need to. General Myra Chung found her in a cave system beneath a mountain range that had once been sacred to dragonkind. Isolderix was not hiding. She was simply tired. She had watched her entire species hunted to extinction, and she no longer had the will to flee. The general did not come with an army. She came with a small honor guard and a message. "We're not going to kill you," Myra Chen said, standing before the last dragon without showing fear. "Not yet, anyway. I wanted you to understand something first." Zolderix lifted her massive head. Her eyes, ancient as stars, studied the small human before her. "Understand what? That you have won? I can see that well enough." "No," Myra Chen said. "I want you to understand how we won. Because I don't think you know. I don't think any of your kind ever really knew." The dragon was silent, waiting. "You were powerful," the general continued. "More powerful than us in every way that seemed to matter. You could fly, and we could not. You could breathe fire, and we could not. You were stronger, faster, and lived longer than any human who ever existed. By every measure of individual strength, you should have ruled forever. And yet here we are," Isolderix said bitterly. "Here we are," Myra Chen agreed. "Because power isn't evolution. You were the same thing for 100,000 years. The same fire, the same scales, the same tactics, the same arrogance. Generation after generation, unchanging. Perfect and eternal and absolutely still." She gestured to the soldiers behind her, to the weapons they carried, to the world outside that had been transformed by human hands. "We changed every single generation. Every failure taught us something. Every death made us smarter. Every child born inherited everything their parents had learned. We built on each other, climbed on each other's shoulders, passed the torch forward and forward until we could reach heights that would have seemed impossible to our ancestors." Solderix stared at her for a long moment. "You are saying that we lost because we did not grow. I'm saying you lost the moment we started growing. The moment the first human looked at a dragon and decided to remember what they saw. The moment they wrote it down and shared it with others. The moment they taught their children and their children's children everything they had learned." The general stepped closer, close enough to touch the dragon's ancient scales. "We didn't defeat you with strength. We defeated you with time and memory. We remembered together. We evolved together. And you stood still." Isolderix closed her eyes. When she opened them again, some of the fire had faded from their depths. "So this is how it ends. Not with a battle, but with an explanation." "I thought you deserved to understand," Myra Chen said. "Your kind ruled this world for 100 millennia. That deserves some respect. But your time is over. Ours is just beginning." They kept Isolderix alive for another decade. She answered their questions about dragon history and biology, filling books with knowledge that would have been lost forever. When she finally died, peacefully in her sleep, the humans built her a monument. Not because they forgave her for the millions her kind had killed over the ages, but because she represented something important. She was the last predator. The final proof that evolution had moved past the need for gods of fire and terror. The humans looked to the sky and saw no shadows. For the first time in 100,000 years, the world belonged to them, and this was only the beginning.